Hello, my name's Judy Darby. Frequently, students tell me that they find poetry difficult to understand, and I think that this difficulty arises from the fact that it is an unfamiliar medium for them. I assure you that the more you acquaint yourself with this form of literature, the easier it will become to understand, and if you make sure you have a sound knowledge of figurative language, you will soon find a great joy and satisfaction in writing about poetry. Apart from metre and rhyme, poetry's main distinction is that it is concentrated. There is so much to unpack, and that is why poetry is rich in metaphor and simile, which we term imagery. The poems you have to understand and write about for your AQA examination are found in two sections: power and conflict, and love and relationships. I will examine some of them with you today, and then put guidance for all of them, including the ones not discussed here, on my blog, which you will find under Judy Darby, My Writing and Aspirations. Okay, the first one I'd like us to look at is Ozymandias by Shelley. The form of this poem is a sonnet, but it is not a regular Shakespearean or Petrarchan one, although it is written in iambic pentameter, and has a volta or turning point at line 9, as a Petrarchan sonnet does. But it lacks the regular rhyme scheme of a classic sonnet. Shelley might well have chosen an irregular rhyme scheme for more than one reason. He was a natural rebel and often did not conform to accepted conventions, but there might also be the desire to show that man's power is finite and often illusory, and that human structures will be destroyed over time, with nature triumphing. Ozymandias is the Greek name for the pharaoh Ramses II, who was as tyrannical and arrogant as typically pharaohs were. In this sonnet, Shelley ridiculed him by allowing the king to portray himself as a fool with his own words. The theme of this poem is that material structures and possessions decay over time, and pride really does come before a fall if that isn't recognised. Perhaps Shelley is also trying to persuade us that art and language will endure far longer than the arrogance of the temporal ruler. The sculptor's skill is also recognised, along with the knowledge that his work cannot last. Let us look at the poem. There are 3 voices in this poem. The narrator speaks first and very briefly, and tells us that he encountered someone who visited an ancient land. This would have been a reference to Egypt. The second voice in the poem is that of the traveller, who speaks of finding the remains of a statue in the desert. Vast and trunkless, emphasises how massive the statue was originally, and the arrogance of its namesake. We see from the outset that nature in the form of the desert is more powerful, as the remains are half sunk in the sand and the face is shattered. But signs of what the ruler was like are clear, with his character revealed in his face, words such as frown, wrinkled, and sneer of cold command, the harsh, chilling alliteration of the latter giving an unpleasant, uncompromising picture of Ozymandias. The shrewdness of the sculptor is displayed in that he has well those passions read of the king, recognising and reproducing in stone the arrogant tyrant's nature, and he mocked his master by his portrayal of him. The heart that fed is ambiguous, but could well allude to the fact that while the sculptor was mocking Ozymandias, the ruler was paying him, doubtless unwitting of the sculptor's scorn. The words engraved on the pedestal are further proof of the egotistic, imperious nature of the king. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. He is describing himself as greater than any other ruler, and he is contemptuous and dismissive of those he terms as mighty. He cares only for his own power, more than willing to challenge others who are powerful also. The caesura in these 2 lines emphasises King of Kings, and also ye mighty, and despair. However, the ruin of this statue symbolises how fleeting his arrogant words and actions are, and the short statement with its cold finality, nothing beside remains. The final lines, with the caesura before the plosive alliterative boundless and bare, and the lingering alliterative tone lone and level, followed immediately by the smooth alliteration of sans stretch, emphasize how nature has triumphed over man's all too brief reign of arrogance and intimidation. The themes of this poem are those of arrogance, pride, and fleeting power. Ozymandias lacks any understanding of what is important in life, along with other rulers of the time. Might was right, and there was no place for empathy, compassion, and humility. Next poem I'd like us to look at is London by William Blake. Blake's London was a grim place for the working classes. Poverty was the norm, and Blake felt that those who could help the poor did absolutely nothing. In this poem, he writes of a walk round London and describes what he sees. He is filled with anger and a sense of helplessness. Each stanza examines a different aspect of everyday life, composing a complete picture of misery and despair. Blake's criticism of the rich and powerful could also have been affected by the French Revolution, as there were many in England who saw that as a symbol of hope. The form of the poem is regular trochaic tetrameter. This is 4 feet or 8 syllables to the line, having one stressed syllable followed by an unstressed one. Such regularity is rare in English verse, and this regularity paradoxically makes Blake's description even more bleak and hopeless. The first stanza tells us what Blake actually saw as he walked round the city. The streets are chartered, which means that they are privately owned by virtue of royal charters which led to restrictions in the rights of common people. The repetition of chartered gives this emphasis, and Blake marks or notices the weakness and misery on the faces of everyone he sees. Again, he uses repetition to stress this fact, with mark utilised as both a verb and a noun. The second stanza introduces the sounds of distress in the city, and this time the repetition of cry, whether it be that of man or laced with fear when from an infant, is given a sense of urgency and conviction when prefaced with every, for no one is immune, at least amongst the impoverished. Their plight also affects the way they think, for their restricted lives and punitive laws cause mind-forged manacles which repress rethinking, for they aid the rich and powerful whose interests lie in keeping the working classes powerless. Blake moves on to criticising those bodies who cause or ignore the problems. He is angry that the church does not speak out about child labour, specifically child chimney sweeps. Their cries every blackening church appalls. A double meaning, as literally the filthy spewing factory chimneys would cover all buildings with a layer of soot, and metaphorically his reference is to the wilful ignoring by the church to suffering. Then the hapless, meaning unfortunate, soldiers who fight to protect privileged royalty, perhaps another reference to the battle with revolutionary France. Stanza 4 is dark, both in meaning and time. Blake refers to midnight and prostitution. The girls are young, youthful harlot, who would be prone to unwanted pregnancies and sexual diseases. These would be passed on to their clients, and hence the oxymoron marriage hearse, as the diseases, often fatal, would infect a whole household, ending in death. Plagues has connotations of Old Testament biblical stories with its hints of punishment. This poem, with its ballad form, is angry and vitriolic. Blake feels helpless to change anything while inveighing against a political and religious system that is callous and self-seeking, with its blatant disregard for the impoverished and suffering. Can we next look at the Prelude by Wordsworth? And this extract is from a much longer autobiographical poem in which Wordsworth records his experiences with nature as he grows from child to adult. He personifies nature, seeing her as having great influence on his moral and spiritual development. And in these lines, he considers how nature rebukes his borrowing of a boat without permission. Wordsworth wrote the Prelude in iambic pentameter, 10 syllables or 5 feet to a line, and it is also blank verse, which gives it a conversational air. The mood at the beginning of this extract is upbeat. One summer evening, led by her, and here he sounds as if he feels that he has nature's approval for what he intends to do, which is to take the little boat for a ride. However, the poet has a sense of wrongdoing when he says it was an act of stealth and troubled pleasure, the oxymoron emphasizing his emotional conflict. Nevertheless, all is well for the moment, and Wordsworth gives us a beautiful picture of the lake in the evening, with the sibilant small circles glittering idly in sparkling light, and the young boy is proud of his skill, believing that the boat is magical, an elfin pinnace. The boy has a sense of being alone, with words such as utmost boundary, nothing but the stars and the grey sky, and silent lake, all indicating this. This feeling lays the foundation for his overwhelming fear when suddenly he moves from the calm, happy simile, heaving through the water like a swan, to a huge peak, black and huge, threatening his peace of mind. The repetition of huge, coupled with upreared its head, emphasizes the sudden terror of the young boy, and he personifies the peak with the alliterative, measured motion, usually a warm sound, but given sinister overtones here. The simile, like a living thing strode after me, is powerful, and the alliterative L sound slows the words down, creating extra emphasis. The boy turns the boat round, trembling oars revealing his emotional state, and still the lake is silent, as guiltily, the boy makes his way back to the covert or secret place. His mood has changed drastically from that when he set out. Words such as grave and serious, and the fact that he feels darkness and solitude of blank desertion, gives a bleak, frightening picture of the young boy's emotions, with his lonely terror. This terror, caused by his feelings of guilt, is marked and remains with him for days. The repetition of no, as he lists the loss of everything friendly and familiar, gives us insight into his disturbed and guilty state of mind, especially as the pleasant images are replaced by huge and mighty forms. Here again, the vaguely defined huge reflects the young boy's confusion. Despite the fact that earlier he sees the peak like a living thing, he sees the forms which now haunt him as not living like living men, with the alliterative L again slowing the language down to give greater emphasis. He is obsessed by these images in the daytime and troubled with nightmares. The extract displays graphically the profound effect nature had upon Wordsworth from a young boy. It is a stark experience and illustrates how nature can chastise and punish, as well as uplift and inspire. Kamikaze by Beatrice Garland is a very poignant poem, and it's very gentle and sad also, and tells the story of a kamikaze pilot who changed his mind at the last minute, overcoming the training and brainwashing to return to a family and community who acted as if he didn't exist. So great was the reflected shame. Kamikaze pilots were Japanese pilots towards the end of the Second World War who were trained for suicidal missions by flying into enemy ships. The form of the poem is irregular, and this reflects the irregularity of the content. The enjambment at the end of most lines, including the final line of the first 5 stanzas, gives the poem flow and pace. One sentence comprises the tale of the pilot's aborted journey. The poem is mainly told in third-person reported speech by the pilot's daughter, but her actual words are italicized in the last 2 stanzas. The first stanza informs us of some of the tools of the trade of a kamikaze pilot, both physical and mental: a flask of water, a samurai's sword, a shaven head full of incantations. The smooth sibilance causes the ritual to sound mundane, but the stanza finishes with the grim reminder that this is a one-way journey into history. The reader's imagination is left to insert the fact that not only would the pilot not be coming home, but in the name of patriotism, wholesale destruction will have occurred also. The pilot's daughter imagines that he is greatly affected by the fishing boats below him, and the simile strung out like bunting gives a strangely festive air to his suicidal mission, while the green-blue translucent sea is a peaceful image made even stronger by the dark shoals of fishes he spies with the beauty of their flashing silver. The alliteration is onomatopoeic and evocative, as we imagine the fish happily turning their bellies swivel towards the sun. It is certainly evocative for the pilot, and we are given another picture of the boy on the shore with his brothers, with the colour of pearl-grey pebbles, the plosive alliteration firmly fixing the image, and the oral sense is brought into play together with the visual, with the turbulent inrush of breakers. This turbulence must have found echoes in the adult who changed his mind, although the poet never spells that out, but leaves the reader to discover from subsequent events. Just as the pilot's father comes home safely in his fishing boat, and safe is repeated to emphasize that point, so too does the pilot, but ironically his homecoming, unlike his father's, is not met with welcome and joy, but with silence. The description of the fish caught by the grandfather is vivid and powerful, finishing with the metaphor of the tuna, the dark prince, muscular, dangerous, and demonstrates the power of memory to change a mindset. The alliterative, safe, sure, salt-sodden, awash, creates a peaceful picture of the pilot's past, a far cry from his present destructive activity. He was never to recreate that peace and happiness, treated worse than a pariah by his wife and neighbours, who treated him as though he no longer existed. This unfortunate man was condemned to silence, even in due course, from his children. The words, "no longer the father we loved," are ironic, as to establish that position he had rejected wholesale slaughter. The final words have great poignancy, as his daughter reflects that he must have pondered which had been the better way to die.